All right, we are live. Awesome. Live on YouTube, live on Instagram. Good morning, folks. My name is Dustin Jones. You are listening to the PTLNIS Daily Show brought to you by the Institute of Clinical Excellence. It's Leadership Thursday. Today's topic at hand, how impressions become memories. How impressions become memories and ways we can leverage the PeakEnd Rule. Before we get into the goods, do you want to mention a couple announcements? First one, Thursday. Typically, we're talking about Gut Check Thursday, right? This week, it's a little bit different. Today is the start of the CrossFit Open. I believe this is the largest participatory sporting event in the world, where many of us on faculty and many of you all watching are going to give it a go at a particular workout that's going to be announced, I believe, this afternoon, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time this Thursday. We have until Monday to complete that, submit our scores, and also hopefully post our scores. Do that, tag Ice Physio. We would love to see you all getting after it with whatever the heck is going to be announced later on this afternoon. That's going to be the Gut Check Thursday for the next 3 weeks. Also, we have Jordan Berry is going to be doing cervical management in Denver this weekend. We also have a couple online courses that are going to be kicking off. CMFA pregnancy postpartum is starting on Monday, February 28th. That one's filling up pretty quickly. And then Modern Management of the Older Adult Essential Foundations, that 8-week online course, is starting on March 2nd, which is 6 days from now. So seats are filling up for those online courses as well. All right, let's get into the goods. PeakEnd Rule, impressions become memories. So I want you to just take a second here and reflect and think about a recent vacation that you had. Whether it was a nice long 4-day weekend or multiple weeks, week long, whatever duration, but just think of a memorable vacation. What do you remember about that? Like, what sticks out, right? Do you remember every single thing that you did that week or that 4-day weekend? Or are there some highlights? You probably have the highlight reel, right? That amazing old fashioned that you had in this beautiful bar or outside patio, whatever it may be, or this epic meal, or maybe some epic adventure hike, sunrise that you saw. There's probably some very distinct memories that you have. And then a lot of lull, right? A lot of time that you've forgotten, like that super late Uber driver that made you late for a reservation, or that 30-minute commute that you had from the airport to your hotel, for example. A lot of things that you forgot, but then probably a handful of things that you have remembered. Or think about the last concert that you went to. Concerts are great for this. You're there for like a 2-hour set. Or if you're Jeff Moore, Mark Gallant, and you're a Fish fan, let's say you're there for 7 hours listening to Fish, right? Are you going to remember every single song that they played? Granted, they may have only played 3 songs over that 7-hour period. Are you going to remember every second? No, you're going to remember when they're just absolutely shredding the guitar, hitting that really high point, that crescendo, if you will. And then you're going to forget a lot, that lull kind of in that concert. You'll probably remember that encore, though, at the end. I can almost guarantee that. So when you think about things, whether it's a vacation, a concert, something memorable, there's usually only a few snapshots that you actually remember versus this full catalog of events. We typically give preference to snapshots over a full catalog of events. And this is an example of the PeakEnd Rule. And I'll just read this for the definition of the PeakEnd Rule. It's a cognitive bias that impacts how people remember past events. Intense positive or negative moments, the peaks, and the final moments of an experience are heavily weighted into our mental calculus. The PeakEnd Rule. Now you're probably thinking of all kinds of things of when you really remembered a particular peak and the end. And so what we want to, if this is a rule and not necessarily a theory, what we really want to speak to is how we can leverage this to make our sessions, presentations, whatever it may be, a little bit more memorable. So we're able to use this to really drive home a particular point or thing that we want people to really walk away with. Whether you're in the clinic, whether you're leading a clinic, whether you're presenting in an education role, this PeakEnd Rule we can leverage in a very powerful way to make our services much more potent and memorable. So I want to dive into some of the research on this because it's really interesting in terms of how this came about. The first kind of documentation of this rule in literature was in 1993. And I'm going to go through this study because it's really interesting and you can probably see yourself in this situation. I'm curious as to what you may do in this particular situation. So this study, 1993, they had this group of individuals that basically put their hands in a bucket of water. All right, not a dangerous experiment whatsoever, but this water was kind of cold, not freezing cold, but at an uncomfortable temperature of around 57 degrees. All right. If you put your hand in 57 degrees long enough, it's going to start to feel pretty cold. So, what they did is this group of folks, they did one round of a minute at 57 degrees Fahrenheit, just kept their hand in that water, got kind of uncomfortable for them. Then, round two, they did the same thing, 1 minute at 57 degrees Fahrenheit. But right after that 60 seconds, it was followed by 30 seconds at 59 degrees. All right. So the difference there is that there was a more pleasant ending. 2 more degrees Fahrenheit, 30 more seconds of that. However, if you think about it, it was 90 seconds of somewhat uncomfortable experience. 60 seconds at 57 degrees and then 30 seconds at 59 degrees. Then on round three, those folks had the option to choose. Would they want to do what they did on round one or round two? Round one being the 60 seconds at 57 degrees, round two being the 60 seconds at 57 degrees plus the 30 seconds at 59 degrees. What do you think they picked? What do you think they picked? 80% of these individuals picked to do round two. And when you think about this, they had 90 seconds of relative discomfort versus the first round only had 60 seconds of relative discomfort. But because that round two had that 60 seconds of relative discomfort and then the last 30 seconds were a little bit more of a pleasant experience, what people thought was, oh, I'll just take round two. 80% of those folks. Not very logical when you look at it on paper, but this is what these folks went with. They went with that 90 seconds, the more suffering, if you will, or that discomfort. The end experience influenced their decision. The PeakEnd Rule at its finest. So let's get into how we can use this to influence our work, whatever that is. So I think a good quote from Maya Angelou is appropriate here. Many of us have heard this before, but I think this is very relevant to this conversation of us using the PeakEnd Rule. Maya Angelou, rest in peace. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. You all have heard that hundreds of times by now, probably. But it's very true. How do you make them feel? How can we leverage this in our situations, in our sessions? So I want to speak to two roles mainly: the clinician that is working with individuals and then the educator. Let's speak to the clinician first. An important question that you need to ask yourself before your session is, how can you engineer the peak? What is the peak of your session? What's that going to be? For some of you all, let's say you're the outpatient orthopedic clinician, you know you have someone that is coming in with relatively high irritability, pain is on board, and your peak in that session may be that lovely thrust manipulation to ease their symptoms and give them all those good feelings, right? Or the dry needling or whatever it is that it may be that you're going to use to reduce that irritability. If you're a Jerry PT, it may be that particular moment where you know you're going to be going for a PR lift, for example, or shows that your patient can do something that they perceived impossible. It may be something like attempting a particular transfer without assistance for the first time in maybe over a decade. That powerful moment where you're able to show that very distinct change, success, progress, and highlight that, that's a peak. Have you thought about that before it actually happened? Because if you think about this going into your sessions, you can leverage these moments to make those impressions memories. They'll walk away remembering, man, Dustin did awesome in that particular part. I really felt very empowered. I'm super confident now, yada, yada, yada. We can use those situations to really make those impressions become memories. What is the peak of your session? And think about that beforehand, before that person walks in the door. Second, what's the end of your session look like? Are you intentionally ending your session on a high note? How can you make them feel good leaving your session? This could be very simple, right? It could be the high five, the hug, the fist pump, whatever, the PR bell in a lot of gyms, right? You hit that lift, you get that personal record, you ding that bell, you get all those lovely endorphins, everyone's clapping, cheering you on. That is a powerful moment. It's much more than a bell, much more than a bell. That impression just became a memory. It could be the complimentary drinks and snacks to give them more of a luxurious experience, right? I've experienced this recently. I went and checked out an OsteoStrong. This is a franchise in many markets that's really targeting towards all kinds of individuals, but particularly folks that may have bone mineral density issues. And they craft this into their sessions. They think about the peak. For them, a lot of the times, the peak of that session is when someone is using their equipment that has this screen that shows objective change and how much people are progressing. But then you end the session by literally lounging around on these really comfortable chairs with these PEMF mats, this pulsed electromagnetic fields, whatever, all kind of mixed bag research on that. But it was a luxurious experience. You're just sitting on that soft, comfortable mat. Someone walks up and said, "Would you like a water?" Makes you feel special, right? Kind of like a VIP experience. It cost them maybe 25 cents to offer me a bottle of water. I said, "Yeah, I'll take that." And I left feeling good. I left feeling good about that session. So many of their members do as well. That is by intent. How can you do the same? For some, it may be having your CrossFit athletes lounge around after their session in some Normatec compression boots. That could be the end to make them feel good once they're leaving. So, what is that peak? What is the end? How can you make them feel good upon leaving your particular session? And that will help those impressions become memories, which is going to just help you in the long term with that relationship. Excuse me. So, clinicians, now educators, same questions, right? We need to think about this. And I've been thinking about this a whole lot more as I've become more in the education space, especially doing these 2-day weekend courses. I think what's interesting from my perspective is as I've taught more and more and more of these weekends, you get to know more of the content, right? You know it more in depth. It is literally ingrained into your heart. And at that moment, you're able to really zoom out and think about the experience of a particular weekend, right? But first, when I started, many of you all can attest to this, when anytime you've done a presentation, you're so worried about getting all the information on the slides, right? You don't want to forget anything. You're so focused on the content that you're completely oblivious to the experience of that presentation or the weekend. But as you get more and more reps and you remember that content and become just ingrained in your soul, you're able to really think about that PeakEnd Rule. So first thing I would say is know your stuff. Know your stuff. So if it's a one-time presentation, repeat, repeat, repeat. Remember that. Go over and over and over those slides so you'll have the bandwidth to actually think about the experience of that particular session. If you do have the luxury of getting a particular presentation multiple times, you're going to get reps. You're going to know that by heart. Then you're going to be able to really think about this PeakEnd Rule in your particular situation. So whether it's a 2-day weekend course, whether it's a 1-hour in-service that you're giving to your folks, ask yourself, what is going to be the peak of your session? And this is really important because oftentimes you have a lot of information to give to folks, right? But a lot of it is not as important as others, right? Some of it you want them to know or know where to get it. Other things you want to drive deep into their soul. What is that? What do you really want people to grasp? And that is your peak. And you want to couple that with some emotion, some maybe a joke, maybe a hard-hitting story. You want to bring the emotion, the experience to that particular point to really drive it home. So that impression ultimately becomes a memory. So what is the peak of your session? At MMOA Live, I think about this with almost every lecture that we give. What's the one thing I want people to walk away knowing with this particular lecture? Knowing that maybe 45 minutes of that particular lecture, they're not going to remember, but they're going to know where to find that information. What's the one thing that I can focus on? That's the peak. And then ultimately, what's the end of your presentation, of your course, whatever it may be? What is the end? What are you doing to make that a memorable ending so people feel good up once they leave? There's nothing worse than the abrupt ending or the abrupt bathroom break, right? Have you ever experienced this where someone is presenting, they've just been going on for like 55 minutes, 60 minutes. You're about to absolutely check out. They don't even recap what they said. You can tell they're getting kind of bored. And they said, all right, let's take a 5-minute break. Nothing worse than that. The end just completely fell off the cliff. All I'm going to remember is nothing from that. How can we make those ends more powerful? So we think about this at ICE and definitely within the MMOA, the older adult division, of how can we bring some fun to the end of our weekends, of our lectures, of our courses? How can we have people leave with a smile, but also drive home some of those really important points? I'm not going to give it away, but if you ever come to MMOA Live, you're going to have a little surprise at the end of the day on Sunday. For those that have come, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but we're very intentional about that because we want you to leave motivated, inspired, but knowing that you had a good time, that you laughed a little bit and met some really cool people. That is our goal. So what is the peak? What is the end? Define that before you get into your session or your presentation, and you're going to turn those impressions ultimately into memories. We can use this PeakEnd rule regardless of the role that we're in. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you use the PeakEnd rule? I'd love to hear how you may leverage that. If you're a clinician, if you're an educator, if you are doing in-services for your colleagues, whatever it may be, I'd love to get your all thoughts. We're on Instagram. You can comment there, on YouTube as well. Podcast listeners, hop on social media, and we'd love to engage because I think this is a really important thing that we can leverage to ultimately improve our effectiveness in whatever we're doing. All right. Thank y'all. Y'all have a lovely rest of your Thursday. Enjoy that CrossFit Open week 1 workout. Be sure to tag Ice Physio. We're excited to see that. I'm not going to give any guesses because I never get it right, but it's going to be interesting. We'll just say that. So, all right. Y'all have a lovely Thursday. We'll talk to y'all soon.